So welcome everyone. We're really happy to have David joining us today to give another one of his great presentations. Today is a little different because we're actually going to go back to the basics, something we often don't do with David. So he'll be talking about 10 common mistakes he sees when you're getting started with Kanban, and of course, how to avoid them. So David, whenever you're ready, I can start.
Thanks, Lauren. Yes, thanks for joining us from around the world. I'm sitting in my home office here, my house near Bilbao in Spain. It's late evening sunshine coming in the window here, and it's been a very nice day. Good. I'm happy to join you for the evening. So 10 commonly recurring mistakes, and the first one that we see is that people are overreaching, and these are not in particularly a priority order or anything. It's selected 10 common mistakes we see. So what do we mean by overreaching? Well, those of you familiar with the KMM are already familiar with this, right? One of the main failure modes with Kanban implementations is an overly ambitious transition plan, of which some Kanban implementation is part. Perhaps there's a fancy, expensive consultant who's feeling pressure to be the smartest guy in the room, and the practices they're recommending are intellectually interesting, but they're just too advanced for where the organization is at, where the culture is at. We push the people too hard and they can't take it. So the solution here is to work with the Kanban maturity model as a means of interpreting the organizational maturity and readiness for specific Kanban practices. Use the model as a guide to suggest the right next steps and avoid overreaching. Find an appropriate level of Kanban implementation that the organization can absorb, and put in place the learning mechanisms so that they start challenging their status quo and incrementally improving from there. Start with where you are now and improve gradually, rather than make an overly ambitious plan which fails on installation. Number two, individual decisions of a Kanban passionate person. So someone who's a big fan, they've perhaps read many of the books, watched many of the conference videos, attended many webinars like this. And we love those people, but it's important that others in the organization are involved in the decision making, that there's buy-in. If others don't understand the purpose or benefits of what they're being asked to do, the result will be resistance and frustration. That people will feel that they're being dictated. They don't get it, and there's resentment. It's very hard to make progress when there's resentment and passive aggressive resistance. So those of you who've been through our KMP training will recognize the recommended way to start with Kanban is using the static method, the system thinking approach to implementing Kanban. And our Kanban system design class is built around that framework, that workshop, the framework for the static workshop. And the first thing is to solicit sources of dissatisfaction. What prevents you from doing a good job? Or if you're the customer, what are you unhappy with about the service delivery you get from your supplier? and make a list of those. Then show how Kanban can help address some or maybe even all of those sources of dissatisfaction. Tie specific things to specific dissatisfactions. Demonstrate the benefits, and of course, avoid overreaching. Number 3, Kanban introduced only to replace a current method or way of working. The whole stop what we're doing and introduce Kanban as a replacement is really somewhat wrong-headed thinking. It may be that there's a plateau in the performance. It's not unusual for me to speak with a boss of an organization, a vice president of a business unit, perhaps, who says, you know, we introduced this other framework a few years ago and things got better for a while, but since then they've plateaued and nothing else is happening. So we thought we'd switch that for Kanban. And that's the wrong way to think about it. Really, Kanban is about starting where you are. You add Kanban to the existing situation. You don't replace something doing with your Kanban implementation. Now, for many years, we've been inspired by the philosophy of Bruce Lee, the Chinese martial arts kung fu master. And one of Bruce Lee's ideas was that he borrowed from Taoism, that you should be like water, and that water, he would say things like, if you pour water into a cup, it becomes the cup, that it can assume any shape that you pour the water into. And the whole idea of starting with what you do now, Kanban will form a relationship with your current way of working, that we should think Kanban is like water, and if we have a cup, we've poured the water into the cup, it becomes the cup. The Kanban implementation should become part of your existing way of working. Number 4, managers are not trained in Kanban. It is perhaps one of the, if not the most commonly recurring suggestion or complaint at the end of Kanban training. My manager should have been in this class. Strangely, of course, or it shouldn't be strange, it's management training. And our business is called the David J. Anderson School of Management, and our methods are about improved management. You would think that managers might think that's useful for them. However, it's terribly common for managers to send their workers to the training and not attend the training themselves. And this creates an impediment. Imposing Kanban on the employees, Kanban's something we do to the employees, rather than a new way of thinking and making decisions and taking actions for managers, and for that matter, empowered employees who are acting autonomously. Managers are often following trends and buzzwords. Therefore, we heard Kanban was this new thing that could help us, so that's why we're doing it. And this quite traditional management thinking, we see that managers often act like dating agents or traffic cops. They see their role as matching up work with workers, sending them on a date together, or directing the traffic, directing the flow of work through their organization. And these are not particularly useful ideas. And really, we need the managers to think differently, much better if they've attended the Kanban training and had a deeper appreciation of what's affecting the performance of their organization. We'd rather that they're using an evolutionary approach, not a drastic change approach. And Kanban practices need to be used to enable the workflow, to keep the work flowing, and make that much more effective. We want to focus on flow and the management of delivery of customer valued work. So what did the customer ask us for? What did we do to it? Where did it go? And if we delivered it to the customer, are they happy? Are they satisfied with what we did? So when I was teaching this more often, I would often challenge attendees with, imagine that you're the supervisor or the store manager of a Starbucks or a similar cafe. What business are you in? What do your customers ask you for? And it's not a difficult question. The answer is cups of coffee. We're in the cup of coffee business. People ask us for a coffee and we write down their order on the cup, and then that cup flows through the system and eventually it's filled up with the coffee they order and it's left on the counter for the customer to pick it up and take it away to drink. Well, what's the equivalent of that for you in your organization? What's the equivalent of the cup of coffee? How does it flow through the organization? Where does it go when it's done? And are the customers satisfied? This is the mindset that we need people to be adopting. Number 5, running an open loop, no feedback. My experience is people love to talk about feedback, and it's become terribly trendy in business management books to talk about a feedback culture. Some very big, rich, well-known companies like Netflix pride themselves on having a feedback culture. And yet they don't necessarily understand what a real feedback system really means. It means that we have an ability to understand an objective or a target or some desirable outcome, that we take some action, that we've got an ability to collect some information about how well that action was received, and then compare it with our original expectation. And if there's still a gap, send a signal that says we need to make some change. So I see a lot of organizations that think they have a feedback culture because they like to give each other unsolicited advice. And actually, they're running on open loop. Things are not improving because they haven't closed the loop and they're unable to learn. So we see action points which are never completed, repetitive problems discussed in perhaps a retrospective, but things don't change and the same problem pops up again and again. We see stalled initiatives because of a lack of leadership and a lack of action taking. We need people to decide the outcome that you expect or hope to achieve. Find someone accountable and responsible for introducing change that will hopefully get you to that, and always close the loop, verify outcomes and adjust if needed. Number 6, no buffers and work in progress limits. So there's a Kanban board on the wall, but it's not really a Kanban system. There's no WIP limits. Any task can be put in the process at any time. There's no buffers. Everything's in progress. Effectively, it's a push system with some visualization. It's very shallow, low maturity Kanban. So what's needed is the introduction of initial WIP limits. Perhaps you need to start with individual WIP limits, not a Kanban system, just WIP limits on the people. And install some buffers to visualize work that's available for pull, work that's ready. And therefore, if you start it, it has everything that's needed available in order to get it done. So there's a low probability that it will get blocked. And we need some pull policies. What does it mean for something to be ready to pull to the next stage in your process? What does it mean to be ready to pull into your process in the very first instance? And these criteria will naturally start to constrain the number of items that are considered ready. And there'll be much more of a focus on how do we meet this criteria so that the item can keep flowing. Number 7, no metrics. We do Kanban because there's no metrics. Believe it or not, people actually say this. Metrics being treated previously as the means to punish employees, therefore we're afraid of metrics. They've been weaponized and misused in the past. And then there's often, and this is true more in some parts of the world than others, despite the fact that we have a generally university educated workforce, there's often a severe lack of mathematical literacy. So some basic understandings like averages are not very useful for making decisions. There's a very poor appreciation of that idea. So we want to people to start with lead time. Start by instrumenting your system, recording when the customer asked you for a request, when you accepted their order, and when you delivered it or made it available to the customer. Just very basic dates that need to be recorded, and almost all the Kanban metrics we need can be deduced from just those very basic dates. And use metrics often during your feedback mechanisms. That what's an acceptable delivery time to our customers, and how often do we meet that delivery time? How often is our lead time less than the tolerance that our customers have? And track our progress over time. Are we improving? Are we getting closer to an acceptable level that the customer will consider fit for their purpose? Number 8, no cadences to review and improve. So feedback mechanisms are important, and we need to decide how often we should be sampling that feedback and making decisions. If we have frequent meetings, reviews, retrospectives, whatever we might call them, and we sit at this meeting and there's no new information since the last time we were there, we're holding the meeting too often. If, on the other hand, the meetings are very infrequent, then there's too much data to analyze. And there's some skill in balancing this frequency so that our feedback system isn't over damped, where we're not making decisions frequently enough, or under damped, where we're very reactionary to every movement in our data. So we're trying Kanban because we have too many meetings. And people look at the recommendations we have for feedback mechanisms and they think, oh, this is a lot of new meetings. No, it's not. You have existing meetings, turn them into real feedback mechanisms. And then for some reason, there are people that believe there's no meetings in Kanban apart from the daily meeting in front of the board. And they have a lot of baggage, bad experience with time wasted in meetings. Historically, they haven't been any effective effective meetings because they haven't been effective feedback mechanisms. This very old graphic slide here of our Kanban cadences, the basic feedback mechanisms in Kanban and the opportunities to take action and drive improvement. The operational set here of replenishing our Kanban system, flowing the work at our daily Kanban meeting, and then planning the delivery and arranging regular delivery to the customer. And then in the top part of the picture here, all of these reviews are the improvement drivers. It's what's driving improvement. This is driving improvement. And this is, let's call it operational delivery of customer valued work. Number 9, no rules or policies. It's a basic management failure that there is a lack of recognition that policies define how work is done. They create constraints around things. And the role of managers is to take ownership of those policies. And when desirable outcomes are not happening, then the leverage mechanism for changing the way the work is done, the way the work works, is to change the policy. Having clear policies is also a key enabler of empowerment and autonomy. If people don't know what to do when a decision should be taken, hence they avoid making decisions, this causes delay. Perhaps they want to kick the decision up to a more senior level person, and this person becomes overloaded because they're making lots of trivial decisions that should have been made much closer to where the work is being done. Alternatively, if we have no policies, therefore no constraints, we have anarchy. Everyone does whatever they want. So we need to describe basic elements of our process and our workflow and the work with policy, and look for the decision points, look for where we have to make decisions at. For example, what item should we pull next? And what guidelines might we have around how to choose one item from a set of various options? Decide these rules and then encourage people to follow them, to follow the policy, to have a consistent system of how we work, how we make decisions and take actions. And if the outcome isn't the desirable outcome we want, the leverage point is to change the policies. Finally, number 10, hidden work. So the board doesn't visualize our full process, or all the work we're doing isn't on the board. Right? Or this is just one small task, I can do it quickly without creating a ticket for it. And in some cases, I don't know what our process is. These are all things that we hear. And the key here is we need to spend time discovering the activities that we do to deliver the work, and to question what our workers are doing. Can they tell us who the customer is for what they're doing? Can they tell us the activity, how it relates to our customer deliverable? We want to visualize the impact. one great example I saw many years ago, a graphic design department in an ad agency. The graphic designers were often interrupted with phone calls, usually from account managers who were asking questions about what might be possible for a particular client campaign. And they were encouraged to collect sticky notes, little tiny bookmark stickies. And every time they got an interruption, just stick it on their monitor. And then at the end of each day, someone collected those and analyzed them, collected the data, started measuring. So visualize the impact and discover things that are not being done. When I first started with Kanban, the early years, in 2006, the managers who worked for me, we concluded that only about half of the work that was happening in my organization was being tracked and was therefore visible to management. So each of the management team reporting to me had it on their annual goals to increase that 50% to at least 80 and then 90%. And to keep challenging every day what team members were doing. If it wasn't work that was on a ticket, what were they doing? And why wasn't it visible to us? So to summarize this list of 10, the avoid overreaching. Don't let your Kanban passionate person dictate the implementation. Get other people involved, make it a collaborative, start where you are now and incrementally change. If Kanban's being introduced only to replace a current way of working, that's the wrong mindset. Kanban's something you add to what you do now because we start with where you are and evolve from there. It's really important that managers have exposure to the ideas that are in the Kanban method and to recognize that it is a management method and it is relevant to them and their ways of making decisions, their responsibilities, for example, to manage sets of policies. We need real feedback mechanisms. If you're running an open loop, things will never improve. And if things aren't improving, it's a strong indicator that you may be running on open loop. No buffers and WIP limits. If it's just a board on the wall and you've got some visualization, it's a start, but there's a lot more you can be doing. No metrics. Customers care about usually only a few things, but most typically they care about quality and they care about predictability and they care about delivery time. And these are all things that are easily instrumented and recorded. And we should be using these metrics at the feedback opportunities. No cadences. Our feedback opportunities should be scheduled, they should be regular, and the frequency should be tuned to the information arrival rate. If we're delivering hundreds of tickets every day, we've got plenty of data on a daily or weekly basis. If we're delivering projects in a portfolio and it's only one or two every 6 months, then we don't have a lot of data. So we should hold the feedback mechanisms less frequently. A lack of explicit policy. It's a real basic failing to understand a core idea in the Kanban method. Make your policies explicit and use them to empower people so that they have autonomy and they can make their own decisions. That if Kanban's working properly, management time should be freed up in order to think about improvements and to anticipate the future. because workers can make their own decisions, and good quality decisions, trustworthy decisions. And then finally, we need to expose the hidden work. We want to be able to see at least 90% of what's going on, and recognize that you really can't manage it effectively if you can't see it. If you can't see it, you can't instrument it. And if you can't instrument it, you don't have metrics, you don't have the input for your feedback mechanisms, you can't drive improvement. So to learn some more here, Lauren would love to hear from you at the info@djaa.com, or just take a look at our website, djaa.com. And a reminder that nowadays we have online self-paced learning courses. There's the Introduction to Kanban class, and there's the Fit for Purpose class based on my book with Alexei Zhegloff, A Fit for Purpose. And Lauren, maybe I can stop sharing, and perhaps we have time for a few questions.
Yeah, we already have a few in, so let's get to it. So the first question that we have is, what's the most efficient way to ask the boss to buy in Kanban?
It's a strangely worded question. How do you measure the efficiency of asking your boss for something? If the question is what do you think the most effective way is to get managers to buy in, the key is always that there has to be accountability, that managers need to be held accountable. They need to take responsibility for outcomes. So there needs to be a lot of transparency into outcomes and whether they're satisfactory or not. And if they're not, there needs to be accountability for the manager. Now, once they're in that position, they're going to start asking themselves, how can I be more effective? And how can we improve in order that the outcomes are better aligned with expectations? And that's the opportunity to introduce Kanban as a mechanism for driving that improvement. But the key is accountability.
Okay, so the next question is one that we get all the time in our beginner level classes. So for teams that are new to Kanban, what's a good approach to define WIP limits?
There's so many answers to that. An answer that I used to give frequently is that the WIP limit is 5. And the reason for this was that I'd traveled all over the world and seen people at companies in 5 or 6 continents with Kanban implementations, Kanban boards. And typically the WIP limits that I saw on those boards varied between 2 and 10. So if you don't know where to start, split the difference, and therefore the answer is 5. If you just went 5, 5, 5, 5 the whole way across the board, that's maybe not a bad starting position, providing you have the mechanisms in place to make adjustments after that. There's another school of thought which says you start with the WIP you've got. And if you've 900 things in WIP, then the initial limit's 900. And you don't let anything new in until you drive it down to some more reasonable target, say 100 items. That might take too long. So there's usually harder and softer ways to go about introducing the WIP limit. The softer ways are either not terribly effective or they take a long time. And the harder ways meet with resistance because it pushes people into difficult decision making about what should I do now, what waits until later, and what doesn't get done at all. So that can be uncomfortable to make those decisions, and that's why it's a challenge. Another popular way is simply to ask people, what's a reasonable level of individual multitasking? Two things per person or three things per person. Can we get an agreement on individual WIP limits? And we don't worry too much about the system, the workflow, that for the time being, that can be overburdened. If you study the KMM carefully, you'll realize that's quite a common pattern that's built into the maturity model. That at low maturity, at level 1, we typically see this individual WIP limits, and it's not until level 2 to 3 transition that we start to see workflows introducing WIP limits. And by maturity level 3, it's an end-to-end pool system. There needs to be feedback mechanisms, the opportunity for growth and learning, and some desire to focus on the customer and customer satisfaction. What's the customer's expectation, and are we meeting it? That it shouldn't just be about relieving individuals of overburdening. The real question is, are we delivering what the customer wanted with the right level of predictability, with fast enough, with the right quality level, and so forth.
Okay, the next question I'm going to try, he says it's an observation more than a question. I'll try to get a question out of it. So based on the principle, start with what you do now. Do you think that could ever lead to difficulties down the road? So the example is number 6, no WIP limits. Managers might like the idea of limiting work in progress within the team, but they're not willing to let customers know about the queues or WIP limits, or ask customers for their requests to wait in line.
So we say yes to every customer. Is it simply the case that we have unlimited resources? We can say yes to everyone, and all our customers are happy. That the reality is you need to focus on the customer and whether the customers are satisfied or not. And if the answer is no, then there needs to be some attention paid to what will it take to improve customer satisfaction. And that's probably going to require us to say no to some customers, to refute some demand. And therefore, the key is always accountability, and it's always a focus on customer and the customer's expected outcome. And if you do that, it becomes a natural chain that you have to limit the work in progress, because it will become self-evident that saying yes to too many things is maybe not the only, but one of the root causes of the dissatisfaction, the poor quality, things taking too long, things being unpredictable. But I think the question was something like, could there be problems with starting with what you do now? My observation of managers who want to wholesale change things is that they don't really know what they're doing, or they're just incredibly impatient. There may be other dysfunctions there. They may lack trust that they can empower people. That, or it might just be an ego thing that they want some grand victory that happens very quickly, that is attached to them as the great hero leader who made it happen. The start with what you do now thing appeals to much more humble leaders who are externally focused, that their behavior is altruistic, and they recognize that they're working in service to others, in service to the customers. So the start with where you do now, with what you do now approach isn't particularly appealing to low maturity leaders whose behavior is selfish and self-serving.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question, which can also deal with the start with what you do now approach. And it's a question about Scrumban. So the question is, do you see Scrumban as one step before using Kanban? But maybe instead you can talk about, teams that are using Scrum. What would your advice be for getting started with Kanban, or the Scrum better with Kanban? How do they interact with each other? I think a lot of people are confused if it's one or the other.
Yeah, when someone asks a question in that manner, it's an indication they don't understand what Scrumban actually means. Corey Laddis, who first coined the term, he worked for me. And there was one day he was in my office and he said, I've realized that the parts of the organization that use a traditional software development lifecycle versus the other parts that have adopted Scrum already, they need some different advice and guidance on how to get started with Kanban. The concept of Scrumban is just simply that you're using Kanban where a Scrum implementation was the starting condition. So the general advice of you start with what you do now doesn't change. And if what you do now is Scrum, then you add Kanban into your Scrum environment. Now, we've come to realize that people who've spent too much time doing Scrum, their brains are kind of ossified, and they can't think about workflow particularly, or it doesn't occur to them that lead time matters, although it probably does if, say, they put their car in for an oil change and they're like, when will it be finished? The mechanic doesn't say, well, we've added your car to the backlog and we'll be having our next sprint planning this afternoon. And if it's successfully picked for the sprint, well, that sprint's due to finish on Thursday afternoon. And of course, you'll be notified if your car's ready to be picked up at the end of the sprint. But on the other hand, we only hit our sprint commitment about 50% of the time. So even if you get in the sprint planning, your car might not be ready later in the week. I just do not understand the appeal of Scrum over the years. If someone switched their brain into gear and thought about ordinary everyday life, they'd realize it's not how the world works. So we realized that we needed special guidance for people that do Scrum, and we knew this as early as 2007. Now we have a very specifically designed training class called Scrum Better with Kanban for people who've spent too much time in that environment and really struggle with a lot of the basic concepts in Kanban. And it's a great product, the new Scrum Better with Kanban. It is the most polished, well-designed training class that we've ever released. It did go through a 1 to 2 year beta evolution period, and the team that worked on it have done really an exceptionally good quality job with it. And the testing that they did in the marketplace, and how they tuned it, it's a fantastic class, and I think it will help take us a long way, breaking down the mindset and opening the eyes of people who've spent too much time in a Scrum world.
Okay, so transitioning a bit into coaching. So Daryl asked, when everyone you work with has sort of a negative mindset, that you propose things like, let's start adding an end date to your task in Excel, the response is, we don't really have time to do that. Do you have any certain styles or approaches to get them adopt what you're already doing?
Again, it comes down to accountability. What do these people get paid, and why do they get paid? And reminding people that they're not just there to fill up a chair and collect a fancy paycheck, that your business is in business for a reason, and it almost certainly you have customers, and what do those customers expect? So if you're operating a bakery and one of the products you offer is a wedding cake, the customer comes in and says, I'd like you to make the cake for my wedding, and the wedding's on the 14th of July. When do I need to place the order to guarantee that my wedding cake will be ready? And your reply is, well, we don't record the end dates on anything that we do. So actually, we've got no clue whatsoever how long it takes to make a wedding cake. But, if you give us the order in March or April, it'll probably be ready. The people who work in those kind of jobs get paid a fraction of what people in knowledge worker jobs get paid. And yet they're so much more responsible and professional.
Okay, so this is another common question we get for people that are just starting out. It's any online platforms that you recommend for working in a Kanban environment?
So Kanban University website has a list of partners, and I refer you to that. Look on kanban.university.
Okay, similar to the previous question, but I'm more focused on leaders. So what advice do you have to a coach introducing Kanban who's navigating leaders that are not open to change?
It's a tough one. One of the pieces of advice might be find a new client or find a new job. It's a genuine challenge that if you're being asked to pretend to improve the place, so I give you a real world example, but I won't tell you the company or where it was in the northeast of the United States about 10 years ago now. And an organization with two product units in a business unit, vice president of the business unit, about 600 people, and maybe about 12 Scrum teams in each product, fairly decent size scale. And they had plateaued. The manager had brought me in to tell him what to do because there had been no improvement for 4 years. And I spent a bit of time there. I wrote them quite a long report with a lot of recommendations in it. And one of the follow-up conversations I had at a second meeting at the place was, So you're telling me I have to fire all my Scrum Masters? And I said, no, I don't remember writing that anywhere in the report. I did not make a recommendation. Yeah, but you've made this recommendation that we need all these people playing the service delivery manager role and people who need to take accountability for delivering what the business owners have asked for. Yes, I did. Well, if I do that, I'll need to fire all my Scrum Masters. And I said, okay, but that would be your decision. It's not my recommendation. Oh, but the Scrum Masters, they don't have the skill set to do this role that you need done. And I said, well, what do they do? And his reply was blunt. They enforce the rules of Scrum. And I said, okay, so you employ 26 Scrum policemen in this building and you hired them. Right. So the thing was that this particular leader, he wanted to look like he was doing something about the lack of improvement for the previous 4 years, but he didn't actually want to change anything. And things did not improve with that client. And it would be another anecdote, which I won't bother to share. But my final email to him was, if you believe this set of facts that he had stated to be true, then in my opinion, it's an abject failure of leadership. And I didn't hear from him again, right? So sometimes you have to evaluate whether it's a situation where you can make progress and whether someone is genuine about trying to make improvement, or whether they're just pretending, whether it's just a distraction, a misdirection, it's just for show. And then you need to weigh up, do I need this paycheck? And if you do, well, just suck it up and collect the paycheck. And if you don't, then ask yourself, is working here seriously affecting my mental health, my physical health, my relationships with other people, my family? And would it be better just to go look for someone else that I can work for and make a difference in the world? Because the person I'm working for now doesn't want to make a difference in the world. This morning, I got an email from a Fit for Purpose fan from South America, and I know this girl reasonably well, and she had written to me saying, "I got to work this morning, and my boss has quit, and my boss has quit because it's a horrible culture and a horrible environment." And this is my opportunity to get promoted into my boss's job. And, I'm quite young, and it's a great opportunity to get this more senior position and more responsibility and more money. Meanwhile, my boss, who just quit, has gone off to our main competitor, a different company in a different part of the country, and has asked me to follow them there along with two other colleagues that I really like. What's your advice? And I wrote back and said, follow the boss who creates the good environment for you. That if you stay where you are, even though you're going to get promoted and make a bunch more money, you're going to be unhappy and you'll be the next one to quit. So find the leaders that you can work for, and when you find a good one, stick with them.
Okay, thank you, David. So I think that's all we have time for today. So we'll end it there. But as always, we offer a continuation of our webinars where if you, a week later, or maybe you're listening to the recording and you think, oh, wow, I have a question, email it to us at info@dja.com. We always work to answer your questions, even if it's a month after the webinar. And if you have any questions about our courses or any other upcoming events, we love to hear from you then as well. So thank you, David, and thank you everyone for attending today. It was a
My
great one.
pleasure. Thanks for joining us.